This is the Beyond 50 radio program. We thank you for joining us. I'm Daniel Davis, and today we're going to be talking about something that usually by midlife people might be finding either they're on their way to wonderful bliss because of its longevity or perhaps headed for disaster, and that is relationships. Many people usually by the time they approach midlife are facing things such as empty nesting, and they're trying to figure out what do they do with their lives and whether or not their relationships are what they were while they had children. Couples at the Crossroads is the title of the book, and are joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is Miss Suzanne Schwartz, who's going to be talking with us about the 5 steps to finding your way back to love should things be on the rocks. Susan, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, how did you come to write this book? What experiences were going on in your life or the lives of others that inspired you to move in this direction?
Well, the book is co-authored with Daniela Roher, and we're both psychotherapists. And so we see quite a few couples who are coming to a crossroads in their lives. And we believe that the crossroads are possibilities. Rather than the end, they are possibilities for something new and something different. Quite like you had mentioned, people who get to a space in their life and they wonder why their relationship is not the way it was when they had their children at home. But the other question is, why should it be? So maybe there's something else that can develop. And we are quite hopeful as people. And so we thought, well, why not present something so people will be able to learn from their experiences and make their relationship even more than it was before.
Mm-hmm. Well, that only makes sense. Now, there seems to be, obviously there's a lot out there on relationships, especially when it comes to marriage and keeping the marriage alive and hot and happy so it doesn't have to become one of those deadly statistics that we all hear about.
Right.
What is what you put together here different from what people will find out there?
Well, that was one of the things that was very important to us, because out there are, wherever there is, are a lot of things that tell us to do this and do this and do this. It's like a diet for relationships. But we wanted people to be able to reflect together and to feel together and to examine their lives together, which is really quite a different approach. So as we wrote the book, we wrote it with the idea in mind that people might share what they were reading. So they might read to each other, they might talk about a topic, they would be able to express their own ideas with each other, that it would open something up rather than be a recipe that they must follow, because, as you know, diets don't work. So the recipe itself wouldn't work either.
Now, that's interesting. Now, when you think about a book like this, don't you sometimes feel that maybe it's getting into that realm that it might be too late, or is there always a chance for recovery here?
Well, in most situations, I'm not going to say all, but in most situations, there's a time for recovery, which means development beyond where it was before. That is not true of every situation. There are some situations that actually are not meant to go on, and we speak about that, and people need to come to that place themselves. But we also speak about this is a time when you can re-examine what's going on, your hopes, your desires, what you had fantasized, and what you want to continue fantasizing, so that you can develop something. Not all things are supposed to remain the same, and relationships actually always come to a crossroads. I mean, it's a very frequent occurrence. The question is how you get through it and how you deepen your connection with each other. Not just that you've got a Band-Aid and now we agree on something, but more, so what have we really looked at? What have we really shared with each other? How honest have we really been? This is what we're discussing.
Now, as you put this together with your co-author, what was it like to put these steps that you have and to bring this information together, and how you applied and worked with it with couples? I would think it was pretty enjoyable.
Well, actually, what we found is, well, we found that it was very enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
And we also found, and we speak about this in the foreword to the book, we also found that we were repeating with each other the very thing we were writing about.
Mm-hmm.
So we were going through the steps ourselves as we were writing about them. We found ourselves a little bit surprised. We came to a few crossroads. And as we got through them, we learned through the experience of going through our discussions, our dreams, sharing our dreams, talking about our feelings, as a way of even getting deeper into the material.
Mm-hmm.
So it became a parallel process of us repeating exactly the thing that we were writing about. And in a way, that was enjoyable because we could laugh about it. And that's one of the things that happens when people get to a crossroads. They've forgotten how to laugh with each other.
Now, what do you think? Are there common reasons that people divorce, or is is it just as different for everybody as there are people?
Well, it's both of the things that you said. It's always different in some nuance, and also quite similar. The things that happen in our lives, the crises that we face, tend to either make our connections stronger or they tend to break them. So they're very common, like a job stress or a health issue or a family situation or differences in lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what happens is that because we live in such an instant era, we don't learn how to stay with a situation and how to be able to make it down the road. So that's why we used the road and traveling in a vehicle as a metaphor throughout the book, because we tend as a society to give up quite quickly. We see that with our regular cars, or we see that with our, the dryer, or we see that with almost anything. There gets to be a problem, we say, we'll get another one. And we do that with relationships as well because we don't know what else to do. I mean, people are literally stymied. If you ask them, what should I do? They don't even have a clue. And so we give people some clues of understanding how they got there, looking at their past, looking at their present, and where they can proceed.
I like the idea of the crossroads because we always do have choices, don't we?
We always do. Yes, yes.
And one of the things that I found really astonishing is that you were talking about in your book is that 70% of people in a survey said that if they had tried a little longer, a little bit harder to save their marriages, they probably would have. So they just kind of felt for some reason that they were at an impasse and that there was no way to turn back on this. How do you explain something like that?
Well, I think what happens, it's an astounding statistic, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I think what happens is
70% is pretty
amazing?
big.
It's amazing. It's amazing. I think what happens is that people have this idea that the grass is greener someplace else. And so they jump to what looks like green grass, forgetting that as they jump, they're taking the exact same problems that they thought they left with them. And so they come to the conclusion after a while, wait a minute, I'm in the exact same place I was at with this other person. So what's going on? And the issue is, again, I think they just did not know how to approach the situation. And they didn't know how to say, for instance, they didn't know how to say to their spouse, last night I dreamt about having sex with so-and-so. They wouldn't do that because they think it's literal, or they think that it's bad, or they have castigated themselves, or they don't know how to say something that seems shameful. And they haven't learned how to look at their unconscious life, at what is going on underneath the surface, at being able to find the meaning in their connection, what's meaningful, what's good, how to tweak it, how to pay attention every single day. All of these are little but very important essentials of a relationship.
Mm-hmm. I know that you really approach dreams as windows in this work too, which you sort of just touched on that a little bit. That's kind of interesting there, because that's a lot of times, to me, something that you don't find in, say, a book like this when it comes to relationships, and yet dreams are very valuable, I guess, interpretations of what you're taking in the world, and you find that to be very important to pay attention to.
You know, because dreams are natural, they're very easy to access. And you can't really fudge a dream. Mm-hmm. It is what it is, and it's such a wonderful way to share with your partner. You know, I dreamt about such and such. And then the partner has an opportunity to say, well, maybe it means this. And then you can say, well, I think it means that. And you've got an immediate thing with which you can discuss and expand your world. And it's a wonderful, natural way for people to be able to share their emotions, their thoughts, their feelings, right brain to right brain, their bodies, their entire self comes through dreams. So it's an easy, in a way, tool to use. Most people don't.
Now, the thing is, too, though, as you had mentioned earlier in the program about dreams, well, perhaps it could be the partner is dreaming about, as you said, having a sexual encounter with someone perhaps they even know.
Right.
And you start feeling like there's this rocky road when the opposite partner hears this to think, yeah, there's the obvious stuff. Well, I'm unattractive, I'm not enough. We hear enough of these kind of messages, especially in our particular society. Mm-hmm. And you have to say to yourself that once the honesty seems to be on the table, that almost is there a feeling that you can move forward, or have we crossed that point of no return? It can be an easy place for a couple to really be at, but as you say, that's kind of one of those things that you work through as a team.
You do. I think that what happens is that people don't realize that whoever they're dreaming about also represents themselves. So if they are dreaming about someone, for instance, that they want to have sex with, or they're having sex with in the dream, that person represents some qualities that they need to get intimate with themselves. This is kind of a different way of looking at it. So you see the dream not as, I don't want you as my partner, but I want more of me, so I can bring more of me into our relationship. It's more of a connecting tool than it is a judgmental, you're not being enough for me statement. Mm-hmm. And it takes the information that oftentimes happens between couples when things are a little rough. They start blaming each other, which we do. Human nature does, we do that. But the issue is, let's take back that blame. Whatever you're looking at in your partner that you cannot stand, is that a part of yourself? And the dream will help bring it back to you. The communication with your partner will help bring it back to you. Your inner reflections will help bring it back to you. And so you will start to own more of your own personality. And that will, as you have more of yourself comes into your relationship, and more of your partner can come in as well.
That's just such an interesting way to look at things.
Well, you know what we do in the book is we do not pathologize. We do not say, you're wrong. We say, this is what this can mean. So we want to expand the world for people, which is why we bring in all kinds of things like what happened when you were little, how did you learn how to be in a relationship, even what's going on with your brain and your hormones, so that people have got a wider view of themselves, not so much in the area of problematic, but how to take the problems into an expansive, meaningful place.
Now, you describe also that people tend to, as they begin to find problems, if you will, that a lot of times these are things that are reflections of, say, a childhood, that it isn't the relationship that's the problem, but it's those things. Kind of describe what that means.
Well, what happens usually is that our very intense feelings that we learn to express or not express when we were children tend to come out in all relationships the exact way that we learned to either share or not share, be honest or not honest. But where they come out most strongly is in a relationship of intimacy. And that relationship, because it's so close emotionally, we tend unconsciously to repeat how we were treated, and we tend to repeat that treatment even when we didn't like it. How we were treated, then we will treat our partner and ourselves that way. So many people say, I will never be like my mother or my father or this one or that one. They find that they are doing the exact thing. Shocked they are. And there's that childhood pattern that has now snuck its way into the relationship. And by doing that, the relationship then is repeating the exact same past.
Mm-hmm.
And the way out is gaining consciousness of it, because people are just reacting out of what they think they know, not all that they can be. So the childhood past is has gone into the unconscious, and the current relationship is bringing it up into consciousness, again for growth and development.
Now, one thing to be sure of, and I love this when you talk about this, is that, for instance, we tend to stay with the familiar. And on our program, we have been talking, especially in the last couple of years, a lot about neurobiology and the way the mind works. Mm-hmm. And it's really been astounding to think about this. Now, this kind of seems like I'm jumping off track here for just a minute, but I remember the late, and I kind of consider great philosopher, Alan Watts. Mm-hmm. Okay. And in his wonderful autobiography, In My Own Way, he talked about the time that he was an Episcopalian minister. And he said, rarely did I like to do weddings. He says, but here it goes, and I'm going to describe why, but mostly, he says, a lot of people go into a marriage. They start and they go to the wedding. And, that's the party. That's the reception. And that's all the dreams and possibilities all rolled up into one. And he says, obviously it's interesting that people would go into a marriage and a relationship knowing that perhaps there's a pretty good chance it isn't going to work out. So he said he'd find honesty in his ceremony giving, and basically what he would say, look at each other carefully for just this brief moment on this day. You were seeing it yourselves at your very, very best. And just let me assure you that from here, it's all downhill. It's only going to get worse. But he simply says from that point on, but if you can come to embrace each other as you change, and you can feel and know and love the differences you are about to experience with each other, and that's what he goes on to say. Mm-hmm. He literally says from this point on, it's only going to get worse. And it's sort of the question is, what do you do about it? And it's only worse because you have this illusion of who the two of you are at this particular moment. And that's so true in most relationships. Well, and I think what's really fascinating, and I don't know, you can agree with this from your experience, is that by midlife, if a divorce has happened, and there is a remarriage, it's almost as though you woke up and said, okay, I kind of want to do this right. Yeah. And because you're not willing to come into this with the peacock feathers flaring, that you're really authentically going to be you think, why didn't I do that in the first place?
Well, you've mentioned quite a few things. One is that I think Alan Watts was quite of a sarcastic commentary, right? But brilliant nonetheless. But I think that I would question it being downhill. Mm-hmm. I think that we all tend to put a fantasy on a certain age, a certain way one must look, a certain way that one must be, and that's static. The vibrancy of relationship opens itself to change and says the change will develop us beyond where we know right now. We don't know where we are going to go, but we are going somewhere together, hopefully. And the other thing, it allows for the actual fact of it can't stay the same. It can't. It can actually get better, but only if people are willing to go from that beginning fantasy and peel those layers off into find different layers of beauty. I mean, we are different. We take back what we project onto our at the beginning, and then we learn more and more about the person, and that should lead to a greater love. Because hopefully we are being more honest. And as you said, authentic. That's one of the problems that happens of why people lose their touch with each other as they stop being authentic. They just say, I won't tell so-and-so, as I had said earlier, that dream. Or I won't tell what I really feel. I won't really burden this person with my truth. And those places are betrayals of authenticity. They're tiny, but they tend to grow. And therein, I think, lies one of the problems at the crossroads.
Because you talk about that the bodies are wired for cruise control, and that was initially what I was starting to comment about, was about our brains. And it's so true that the reason change is difficult for a lot of us is because the brain it's made for efficiency. And so it finds patterns so it can do things quicker and more efficient than it did before, causing change to be uncomfortable. And you talk about cortisol spikes when you tend to have disagreements and arguments. And they do these things, but then long after the argument's done, you still have that spike you're talking about, which gets you to question, geez, what's going to happen next? It's kind of like it throws the mind out of its constant regularity, so to speak.
It does, and it actually helps us get out of those patterns, which can be beneficial but can also be stagnating. So our bodies and our brains collude together to help us grow. There's something about why should we get over that argument right away? Or why should we get over the upset so fast? Maybe we need to be at this difficult crossroad and just sit there and contemplate together what's going on. And usually what happens is two people, their cortisol levels are not going down at the same time. So one is still riled up, and the other one is perhaps more over it. And that helps both of them get out of their own particular pattern and a little bit into the pattern of their partner. And so it shakes us up, and our wire for cruise control because it's a little shaken, makes us pay more attention. Because one of the things that we were talking about there was of how much, 95% beyond our awareness. I mean, how much are we really conscious of? So the cortisol level, by jumping, shakes us and into another level of consciousness. Helps us, actually.
Now, let's go ahead and briefly, for our listeners out there, talk about the 5 steps that you can sort of take when you're beginning to come to that crossroads. Start with step number 1 here.
Okay.
And that's survey the road.
Well, that means the road you're on already when you're at the crossroads probably has got a bit of damage to it. There's a few potholes, angry, resentment, frustration. You can't get over that disappointment of 3 years ago, whatever. And you're just looking at this pile-up of problems. But you're looking at that road and evaluating within yourself and hopefully with your partner, oh my goodness, what has happened here? What's going on? And in surveying it, our point is not just survey from an angry place, but survey from what works as well, what has worked. Why do we look at each other? Why do we like watching our television shows together? Why do we like exercising together? Why do we like having sex? Because, people can get to the crossroads and they still like each other.
Exactly.
Right. And so sometimes we don't talk about that. But they might still like each other. They just don't know what to do. Some people don't like each other. and that's really the problem. You have to like somebody to work it out, right?
What are you doing married in the first place if you don't like each other?
Exactly right. But, people have lots of reasons about why they get married. So in surveying the road, they might come to a situation where they go, I really didn't like you. I don't like that. I actually asked somebody the other day, a couple that I was working with, do you like each other? They were completely surprised. And they said, well, of course we do. I said, but you didn't sound like it. It took them back, and it made them have to reflect. So this is them reflecting on their road. Yeah, we do like each other. We have something. We like to hold hands. We like being together. We like this. So that's part of the road as well.
The second step you talk about is unearth what's causing the damage. Now, does that tend to be something where, honesty is there, but I don't know if I really should bring this up? Because a lot of times when that happens, it seems, people can tend to use that against each other, especially when a disagreement or perhaps a fight ensues.
Well, you're right. What we discuss in this chapter is what you have described so well, and that would be the shadow emotions. In other words, the things that we hesitate sharing. Now, these can be emotions, feelings, thoughts that we are not sharing for a variety of reasons, but we call them shadow because they go right down into the unconscious. They're hidden and again, for many reasons. The hiddenness of them, the not sharing, causes the damage. So it's not really the relationship itself that might be off, but it's what we are not communicating with the other person. And so what we encourage is people to look inside. And again, dreams show these very easily, the places that we're hiding. And they can help be able to bring out what we are hiding, good and bad things. Maybe we hide, I did wonderfully, but I don't want to hurt my partner with my greatness or my achievement. People do that frequently. It's amazing. And yet that might be a thing that would create more damage by hiding it, not less.
Well, you think about this, and it took me a long time, but when I finally understood you, I'm sure you've heard the Einstein quote that, we use about 3 to 5% of our brain.
Yeah.
Okay? But a lot of people, I wonder, like me for years, it wasn't until maybe a year ago that I finally understood this is what he was talking about. And when I did, I was like astounded. Because you're thinking, how do you develop the rest? The fact is, you talk about this, is that we use about 5 to 10% of our brain. That's our consciousness, okay? That's what we are aware of and are, so we think, in control of. So another 90% of our brain is actually sitting there beneath that surface. Now, the interesting, or should I say the fascinating thing about relationships is they will bring those things up. They will bring all that stuff up. So you have to ask yourself, especially if it comes to those times when you're fighting or you're disagreeing, what am I truly reacting to in this moment? Most of the time, and certainly you can, tell me if I'm on track here or not, I think I am, is that we are tending to react out of the context of the reality of the situation, and then with our conscious mind, we tend to rationalize a very irrational behavior.
I think you're right. I think what you're also speaking about is taking the energy back inside yourself and reflecting on what it is that's really going on inside of yourself. And that is a way of being able to access those hidden shadow emotions and then bring them forward. It changes the dynamic hugely. It expands what we know, because we think we know a lot more than we really do. And especially when they're having a difficulty with the partner, people think that they need to be right, when actually all they really need to do is just show up and be there. And that's, being right sometimes is easier, but it's not really on target.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can be there with an openness and say, I really don't know, or this is quite honestly why I reacted to what you said. My authentic self was doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I put it out in a way that maybe you didn't understand. So let me explain it again.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just repeating exactly the same thing that you're saying. I don't think that any of us can be completely conscious, but we can strive towards more consciousness.
Mm-hmm. Now, the third step is unpack and sort your baggage.
Right.
Boy, how often have we heard we take all of our bags into a relationship? We just don't want to tend to unpack them too much.
Well, you know why? I think we feel shame. And we feel shame. And we also are loath to think about things that were painful. You never remember the pain once it's over. And we also tend to go into flights of fantasy of, if he or she was this way, it would be wonderful, and it would have been better, and ways to get out of the present. If you can stay in the present, it means you will be unpacking your baggage. You will say, oh my goodness, this is so shameful to me, and you will talk about it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And that actually, this is part of, this kind of bleeds over into the things from childhood, but it also might bleed back into other relationships.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I did. This is who I was. Am I still like that? With that kind of an expression, oh my goodness, am I still like that? Well, in some ways we are. And that's something that people don't like to admit, but we are who we are, and we keep growing, even so. So that's our baggage. Our baggage is who we are, and that goes back to that 70% of the people who regretted that they did not try harder because they thought they were leaving the baggage in the other relationship.
Right.
And if you don't leave baggage, you just sort it and resort it as ways of gaining more and more conscious knowledge of yourself.
Isn't it fascinating that we come into this world as children and we just blissfully go about our business of being curious and trying to discover what the world is and following our dreams, and somehow that, I don't know, for maybe not all of us, but at least a fair amount of us, it kind of gets beaten in, whether it's through the parents that you're raised with or school, a variety of reasons. And then we think we find somebody we're going to share a lifetime with, and all that stuff is just right in there, and boom, you get into a relationship, and for the first year, 2, 3, maybe 5 years, it seems to be going pretty good, and then it just unravels, and then you're left standing there, and I can't imagine anyone, and there may be some exceptions, there always is, that when they're approaching or they actually get divorced, that doesn't feel that sense of pain of what a failure they've become because they couldn't make a relationship work. And I kind of wonder if was it the relationship that they feel at such a failure of becoming that statistic of 1 in 2 people, or was there something else, like they were saying, maybe in a deep unconscious way? I just feel a failure because I could never know how to be authentic the whole time.
Yes, I would agree with you, but I also think that our learning comes when we are in pain and when things are difficult. We also learn when things are great and feel good, but we learn from our errors. So I think that as we stumble, and if we have to say to ourselves, I was this wretched failure, maybe that will pitch us deeper into ourselves. And as we go deeper within, we will gain a sense, many senses, of really who we are. And the failure that we feel will turn into a means for knowledge, growth, development, a maybe a deeper spirit of our being. So we don't have to just take around, I was a failure. More it is, what did I not know about myself that I know now and that I will bring more clearly into my life. I won't hide it. I will be more of my real self. And the failure and the divorce cracks us open. And as we are cracked open, all of the potential and all of the wonderful things, as well as all of the pain and the black and difficulties, comes pouring forward. And there we see our baggage laid in front of us. And we have choices, as you had said earlier. What are we going to pick up and take with us? How are we going to make our lives sing and be more of what we really would like them to be? It's a difficult journey, but the journey of life is one crossroad after the other, and that strengthens us. And we find more and more value in our lives through surmounting and going through the crossroads.
Now, the next step you have outlined is rebuild trust for the journey ahead. I don't know. To me, that seems to be the toughest one there.
Well,
because once the mistake or once the choice has been made that could cause emotional devastation, maybe in some cases, you always hear this, oh, sure, I can forgive you, but you can be damn well sure I'm not going to forget. And you think, oh, how do we grow beyond this?
Well, you've got a point. If that is the attitude, how do you grow beyond that? And I would say gradually, thoroughly, kindly, considerately, compassion, but the trust that we are also talking about relates to having a certain empathy, so that we then start to question ourselves and our partner. How do I understand who you are? Why do you not trust me? Why do I not trust you? How will we be able to gradually check in with each other, see how each other really feels? Talk about the trust and the distrust. Sometimes trust can be built in very small ways, little kindnesses that we might do for someone, paying attention to what they would want and need, being aware that maybe at this moment our partner cannot talk about what we are burning to talk about. So make another time that will be good for both. Really paying attention to the fact that a partner is not built the way that we are, but that we can still respond to them and to ourselves in an empathic, understanding, kind, and open way. And trust, as you had said, is completely difficult. It is also the basic of every relationship and the beginning of our lives is trust. So it's something that is absolutely key for rebuilding if that car is gonna make it down the road.
Now, and something within the context of this particular step of the couples that you've worked with, have you seen what seemed to be, I guess, the impossible, to where you go, oh my goodness, I don't know, and it actually found a way to work through and turn itself around to where perhaps the relationship was better than ever? Have you had that experience?
Actually, I have quite a few times.
Yeah, because I know the human condition, the greatest experience of it is its tremendous ability of resilience. But yet sometimes I just don't think enough of us give ourselves that chance.
Well, I think you're right. That's part of the 70%.
Right.
People forget their strengths. They, as I had said earlier, they forget why they might like the person they're with. They forget their own abilities. They forget their own flexibility. That's resilience. And that the human nature is incredibly strong and incredibly pliable. And the brain is. We can learn and relearn. Now we know through neuroscience we can relearn through our entire lives. And that's true emotionally as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't have to stay in these patterns, and to look at a relationship, to be in a relationship and say, it looks really difficult, but let's see what we can do. And I think that some people can certainly figure it on their own, and some people really benefit with therapy, especially if it's very, very difficult and they need some guidance and some ways to get more interior and then more connected. So I think that there are situations where people would look at it and say, this will never work, and it does. And that's the beauty of human nature.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because the truth is, when you do get to a point where you say to yourself, well, geez, I just don't know if I really want to put the time and the energy into rebuilding something that feels like it's pretty much, has fallen apart,
right.
As you said earlier in the program, well, if that's the way it's going to be, you can find yourself taking that along with you, and in the new relationship, it's only a matter of time before you find yourself doing the same thing you were doing before, and the same unraveling. Mm-hmm.
Right, that's exactly right. I mean, again, I think our personalities are very resilient and equally stuck in patterns.
Mm-hmm.
So the work that it takes to rebuild, to get through the difficulties is actually fraught with pleasure at times. And it should be. Mm-hmm. It shouldn't just be slogging through some fields in difficulties all the time. There should be places where, I know why I'm doing this. Mm-hmm. I know I'm going to get something from this. We are going to be stronger as a result and grow more.
I remember some years ago I was doing an interview with an author who put together a sort of a pictorial book, and there were illustrations that were within this book. And it was talking about a relationship in this book that has been around for a while, man. And this is what it's like. It's like a pair of old shoes or that comfortable couch that's been, in the family for maybe a generation or two. And so I'm going through this, and it was really a cute little book. Mm-hmm. And I decided to go ahead and give a copy of that to my own parents. And fathers, when you call and you talk, do you want to talk to your mother? You don't usually talk with the father. He just passes you on to your mother. And I said, did you get this book? He says, yeah. And I said, what did you think? He says, and this is a guy that sometimes doesn't say very much. He says, that is so true. That book you gave us is a lot like what relationships become when you've been together for a while. He says, this guy nailed it right on the head with the illustrations and what he said in there. And you think to yourself, when you can push through those barriers. Now, let me ask you this, in a relationship, what is the average, amount of years? And I say averages, that way people know maybe there's a standard that if they get to that point and push through, things can probably only get better. That people feel the most turmoil to where there's real danger, this crossroad that you're talking about, to where they might find themselves apart.
Well, I don't know statistically exactly, but I'll tell you from my
own experience.
In my experience, I would say 17 to 22 years.
Really?
It's a long time, but I think that what you talked about with the couch and the falling apart and the old shoes, there's a little bit of a problem with that in the sense that one of the things that we do in our book, Couples at the Crossroads, is we speak about the car falling apart, quite like what you're saying in that book, but we speak about it being repaired and refurbished and redone, maybe even buying another one, so that the repair becomes a thorough one. It's not just clunking around in the clunker. It's making it through that oldness and restyling it or retooling it or re-upping it. And that's that place where we've learned a bunch from sitting on the old couch and being in the old car, but we also realize that, we want to change the color, we want to repair the dents, we want to make it better. So it becomes a cycle of renewal, actually, and transformation. And that is an emotional place and creates fuel to the relationship, which is the step 5. And that would make people even closer. I think what your father was saying was that he and your mom had some closeness.
Mm-hmm.
And the intimacy and how people are going to be intimate together, how they will be sexual, how they will be physical, how they will set up their own little personal rituals with each other. These are the things that we talk about that help bring a relationship into its full bloom, repairs the road, the car, emotions, recreates trust.
For those of you just joining us, Susan Schwartz is joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program, co-author of the book Couples at the Crossroads. I know most of the comments that I'm getting from the listeners here tend to be pretty interesting, mostly because they're saying, now wait a minute, what are women doing talking about cars? We get the relationship part, but boy, they're actually talking about cars as a metaphor here, and women don't usually talk about cars.
Well, you know, we wanted to shake things up a little bit and shake up those stereotypes that happen.
If you want to win to a man's heart, generally you start talking about cars, even if you don't know what you're talking about.
That's exactly right. and the other difficult thing is it's so interesting, the comments that you have, because the stereotypes can tend to get in the way. They could be a little part of that rigidness and a pattern which isn't really growth producing. So we want to shake things up and make them a little different, exactly like we've been talking about.
So you get that, people. Susan's fingers and hands are just as greasy and oily as any pit mechanic at Daytona 500. We got you. Now, we've been talking about 5 steps, and, okay, just to briefly go over them, it's survey the road, unearth what's causing the damage, unpack and sort your baggage. The last one we were talking about is rebuild trust for the journey ahead. And number 5 is access the emotions that fuel, get the metaphor, people, fuel your relationship.
And so this is what I referred to just a couple of moments ago and relates to intimacy. Because emotions create a bridge, intimacy creates a bridge, and both of those access the energy to be able to want to be together. And because, you know, when relationships have hit the crossroads, the energy for dealing with it tends to go out. It's like the gas out of the car. And so we want to bring that back in. And as I had mentioned, in various ways, talking about what you really believe now. Who are you now? What is your idea of your relationship now? Even if you've been together 20 or more years. How do you want to live now? What do you feel is important? Who should you connect with? What should you do? Do you really still love this favorite dessert? Is that really the thing that's important? Or, you know, is that really who you are now? And so it's a re-looking at how we can be together in viable ways.
Now, isn't it funny, because a lot of times you hear this from people, is that when they become attracted and they get into a relationship with someone, that thing they loved about them, that attracted them to that person, becomes the thing that annoys them the most.
Right. That's right. And so here's the fuel. So the old fuel isn't working. So it requires some kind of consciousness to look inside and say, what other fuel is going to work? I'm different. We shouldn't be the same way as we were. We don't really want our relationship to be the way it was at the very beginning because we're different now. We've changed. We've grown. And so it's a recognition of that. And you want to share who you are now and who you've developed into with your partner. It's another way to get close, another way to build trust, another way to be very emotionally connected.
Now, obviously, you know, being a team in a relationship is something that we really need to come to not only understand, but to put into practice, because one side just can't do everything.
True. And so, actually, it doesn't work. I hear people all the time say, I'm trying really hard, I'm doing this and I'm doing that. And I say, and what is your partner doing?
Mm-hmm.
There's the team. Sometimes people think if they work really, really hard, they'll make it happen. No, they won't. They'll just create more separation.
Mm-hmm.
If they work really, really hard with their partner, they will create something which is, what is that expression? The sum is greater than the parts.
Mm-hmm.
So the sum of the two becomes something that is completely different than the two individually. Mm-hmm. To be able to learn teamwork, like we learn in sports, is very difficult for people to do. And so there are many times in the day that they could reach out to their partner like a team. Could you do this for me? I will do that for you. I'll do this, you'll do that. It's like, let's make a deal. But let's make a deal together, and let's make it conscious. Mm-hmm. And so then people can, when someone has done something lovely for you, then you can say, well, now I can do this thing for you. And so it becomes a mutual place of thanks and compassion and well-being for each other.
Mm-hmm. Now, Susan, I have to ask this. As the two of you were researching and putting this book together for people, mm-hmm. Couples at the Crossroads, you've obviously been in practice as a psychotherapist for a lot of years. Did you find some things that popped up that surprised you that you said, wow, I just never really thought about it that way before?
One of the things that surprised actually both Daniela and myself was that we realized that when we were writing about what's happening to us and happened in all relationships, so all relationships, friends, relationships of all kinds of couples, all kinds of people, kids, parents, go through these crossroads. And as we were going through them ourselves, we realized the real importance of, it seems so obvious, of getting through the issues, but deeply getting through the issues, not applying a Band-Aid, but really dealing with them, because they'll come up. And so they come up, they can be dealt with. And so we found this process to be almost like an organic one that was reoccurring over and over. And each time that we addressed the issues at the crossroads with each other, we grew. And it was surprising and so rewarding. And that is really what we feel that couples go through. The surprise, the difficulty, the rewarding at the end, and a feeling of strength and well-being for having done it.
Because I think, too, that when it comes to a point where a couple does feel that turmoil, that sort of resistance, if you will, about pushing through this stuff that comes up, that they feel, well, I think you've just seen a weakness I didn't want you to see. I wanted to just stay perfect. Okay. And I always find that that's, although a noble goal, is an energetically difficult, if not an impossible one.
We're both laughing. But actually, I'm going to say it is completely impossible. So
I tried to give people the benefit of the doubt through empathy, as you suggested, but yes, I agree.
Right. I also think to drop the veils of perfection is so invigorating, because it is too much. It's like Atlas carrying the world. It's too much to carry. You can't do it. And you're so much more loved. This is what you find out. You're so much more loved for being real than for being perfect. Perfect doesn't do anything other than make you static.
Because I keep remembering this as a sort of a joke from Andrew Dice Clay. And whenever I say this, and there's always the right moment to say this joke, and it's funny because in the joke itself there's so much truth. It's how you really should be, I think. But he says, some people play hard to get, I play hard to want.
I see. Well, I think there's a little bit in that where we want always to be wanted.
Mm-hmm.
We want to let our partner want us. Did you hear? We want to let our partner want us.
Right.
Right? In other words, we want to put out enough signals of, come here. I want to be wanted. Mm-hmm. And the other side of that, of course, is I want you.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that team again.
Fascinating stuff, Susan. I know that you must have not only enjoyed putting this together, but also what's the response been like to your book, Couples at the Crossroads?
We've really had a lovely response of people being very enthused about everything from, oh, I loved the cover, to, oh, I could relate to that vignette in the book. That was me. I had a dream like that. It made me think, and it made me ponder, and it made me reflect. So those are some of the feedback that we've had about the book, and that's actually what we had wanted people to get from it, as well as I've read this book and I want to share it with my partner.
I can't help but remember an image that I had many, many years ago as I worked in the food service industry. And there was a point that I was serving this couple, and they just weren't really saying much to each other at all. But they seemed pretty comfortable, obviously, in their silence of dining together. And I finally came to a point where I said, you two really need to quit talking so much. You know, people just can't seem to get a word in edgewise. And the lady, as quick as a firecracker, says, when you've been married 65 years, apparently you just kind of run out of things to say.
Oh, my goodness. But you know, I'm going to add to that, which is that if you've been married however long, maybe there's something that's going to come from the unconscious and it's going to surprise you.
Exactly.
And you're going to have something more to say.
There's always something.
There's always something. That's what I wanted to add to that. Yes.
Now, your website, Susan, people can find out more.
They can find, and actually they can get a sample chapter to read at www.couplesatthecrossroads.com.
So you get a free manifold download, in other words.
You get a free chapter download. That's exactly right.
Very good.
And then you can buy it.
Couples at the Crossroads is the book. It's time to start exploring those crossroads and moving beyond to see what the road ahead will be like. The adventure is certainly worth taking. Our guest today, Susan Schwartz. Susan, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Thank you so much. It was enjoyable.
You bet. CouplesAtTheCrossroads.com is the website. Thank you also for joining us. Be sure to visit us at our website at Beyond50Radio.com. That is the number 50. We'll have a hot link for Couples at the Crossroads there as well. And also be sure to visit us at our blog. We also have a free weekly e-newsletter. We also encourage you to sign up for that as well. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. And remember, live your day past halfway.